And what we saw that took place on Friday, unlucky Friday the 13th, with the attack on Iran by Israel. This was conditioned, if you like, made possible because the Witkoff and Trump and others had suggested that there would be no attack, no, if you like, military action by Israel at all, while the talks continued. There'd been a row between Netanyahu and Trump, and that Netanyahu had agreed to no attacks during this period. And of course, that was all fake. There was no actually row because they were all totally in agreement that what should happen next should be a complete shock, a psychic shock.
When leaders orchestrate a psychological shock to shift the strategic landscape, they gamble that fear will overpower resilience. Those of us who remember the first Gulf War recall similar rhetoric about swift decapitation strikes. Yet history shows that nations often rally when external powers attempt to engineer their collapse. What concerns me isn't just the strike itself, but the normalization of deception at the highest levels. When trust becomes the first casualty, escalation risks becoming the default response.
If you like, there's a word for it that these intelligence services are using freely, which is a synergistic shock, synergy, meaning from having...
They're betting on the Hezbollah playbook, but Iran isn't some militia tucked away in the hills of Lebanon. It's a nation of 90 million people with layered defenses and deep regional alliances. What worked in one fight doesn't always carry over. Copy-paste strategies tend to fall apart when faced with new realities.
Doing a surprise attack that took out the commanders of the military force, the line commanders, 8 of them, and also at the same time there was a cyber attack on the air defenses. Now, I think Israel thought it was going to last a lot longer, but the Air Force technicians, the Iranian Air Force technicians, worked really hard on this. And 8 hours later, the great claims of Israel that they had an open road to the Tehran were completely overturned. And since then, we've seen very strong performance by the air defense systems of Iran. And this is also, if you like, was part of this process that not only was it supposed to be a shock, it was supposed to be such a severe shock. I think it was modeled probably on the Hezbollah model.
A cyber-physical 1-2 punch is straight out of modern wargaming, but the fact that Tehran's crews restored coverage in just 8 hours says a lot. Redundancies, and possibly some help from Russian tech support, were clearly built in. Planning for resilience beats hoping for a knockout.
And what was this going to do? It was actually going to collapse the regime. And so they thought, and clearly Trump was in this, and his team was in it, because we know that this was a year in preparation. So obviously being talked about. We know it's a year in preparation because the Israelis say it was a year in preparation. The security force say it was a year in preparation, and therefore it was fully coordinated. And the other part of it, of course, which shows what's going on, was that the other part of it was they brought in to Iran various drones, broken up in trucks, wooden trucks, and we're going to play the same, if you like, playbook that they did with Russia against the strategic bombers in Russia, that these drones would suddenly emerge from the backs of vans or from roofs that opened, controlled remotely, and these would attack the self-defense system, the air defenses of Iran.
Targeting civilian scientists crosses a moral Rubicon. Older viewers might remember the backlash after the 1981 Ozark strike. This assassination takes that outrage to another level. When the victims aren't in uniform, international sympathy tends to shift quickly.
Well, that play only lasted for about 8 hours. And yes, all of the commanders happened to be, there was supposed to be an exercise going to happen over the weekend. So all of those military commanders happened to be in one command room, an underground command room, at the time, and that the Israelis were aware of it. It wasn't a secret exercise. It was one with the Russians and others that was well publicized. And they got all of them, 8 of them, and then they killed, if you like, the Russian, the Iranian nuclear scientists. All of those who are civilians, not military people, were killed at home by bombing with their families.
8 hours, that's less than a single work shift, and it unraveled months of Israeli planning. It's reminiscent of the early surprises in the 1973 war, which flipped within days. Rapid recoveries like this can do more to shatter an attacker's aura of invincibility than any press release ever could.
So this was supposed to really, actually knock the whole system off balance, losing their main line of command, losing their air defense, losing these scientists was supposed to create such a psychic shock that the whole of the government would be destabilized and off balance, rather as Hezbollah was off balance. And it was off balance for a period after the loss of Hassan Nasrallah and the Hezbollah leadership. And they thought then what with also the second layer of this was going to be sabotage. They introduced, from outside of the country, groups and saboteurs, mostly from the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Qaeda, into attacking and placing bombs. So many of these things that you see today are not actually fired by aircraft. These are car bombs and bombs there.
Full retaliation from Iran isn't just tit for tat. It's paradigm warfare. By acting openly, Tehran is signaling confidence in its deterrence, much like China did with its 1996 missile test near Taiwan. Sometimes transparency itself becomes a psychological weapon.
However, what was quite striking was that Iran recovered very quickly. It recovered its command structures quickly. It recovered its air defense system, and then decided and made plans for its own self-defense. So what we're seeing, I just want to underline, what we're seeing is really what has happened is a complete attack on a paradigm of thinking, on the sense of, if you like, the invulnerability of Israel as a technical giant, of Israel whose future must be assured, who has the backing of the West, that this was something that it was a perception that has underlain politics for many years, and suddenly the whole paradigm was being cracked because Iran decided that they were going to retaliate and retaliate fully.
If Moscow sees this as a rehearsal for operations against Russia, that tells us something. Global rivals don't see isolated events. They see patterns. When great power playbooks start to overlap, regional fires can quickly turn into continental fault lines.
And also then put it into practice very quickly, and have been doing so ever since. So this paradigm change is going to change the whole balance of politics, geopolitics, I believe, everywhere, not just in the region, but of course, Russia. If you read RIA Novosti today is saying, well, quite clearly, this was a rehearsal for us again. The tactics that we saw on the ground, with the tactics we've seen, the intelligence services, the Mossad, the CIA, MI6, all of them using, they're all one pattern. And this is a pattern that is being exported and used. It's obviously something that has been deliberated on for a year or more. We saw that in the attacks on the strategic bombers in Russia, and the purpose of it is all the same. The purpose to weaken Iran, to weaken Russia, to attack Russia, to divide Russia from China, and eventually allow the United States to pivot towards China. So Russia have come very clearly to that conclusion, and so they are acting accordingly.
The shift from symbolic to strategic targets, defense labs, refineries, means Israel's economic underbelly is now in play. It echoes the 2019 drone strikes on Saudi Aramco that shook global oil markets. Don't be surprised if insurance premiums in Haifa start climbing fast.
So what does it all mean? I think if you allow me just a few more minutes to say,
Sure.
the things that matter then, we had a surprise attack that worked for a short while. There's no doubt it was a surprise, and it took Iran was a shock to Iran, but they recovered quite quickly. So now we're in a war, and Iran is using very powerful missiles, some of them hypersonic. Initially, they were using older missiles, and then they've been advancing them, and we're seeing that effectively this has now proved that the air defenses now of Israel have been largely ineffective. The main air defense layers of Israel are just not working, are not stopping the new attacks. And they are targeting very clearly. Now it is turned, and this is a strategic shift that has been made by Iran. They're targeting strategic sites inside.
Collective memory matters. Iran's 8-year war with Iraq forged a culture of endurance, while Israel's home front has known relative calm since 1973. When staying power is asymmetric, political pressure doesn't build equally. It weighs heavier on one side than the other.
Including the Ministry of Defense sites, the research bureaus, the missile production facilities, some energy, the gas at Haifa, the oil, the refinery at Haifa. All of these have been, and the damage is now severe. So where are we? I think really, although the details of the military situation are sort of lost in a fog of war in some cases, but really one has to look at two things, I think, to decide, where it is going. And one of it is popular support. And I think that this whole exercise was based on the conviction of Trump and Netanyahu together, thinking that Iran is weak, that it is ripe for a regime change, that a big sudden shock of the decapitation, of losing its air defenses, was going to bring about a big popular uprising and antagonism against Iran. Well, that hasn't happened. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite. There's extreme anger in Iran. There are demonstrations in Iran, but they're all demonstrations against the United States and Israel. And the country has coalesced around the leadership, and the leadership has coalesced in a very significant way. And so we are seeing, therefore, a popular support, a growing popular support. In Israel, on the other hand, Israelis perhaps have not had that history of sufferings that Iranians have had, and of forbearance and resolve.
Pinning hopes on U.S. escalation feels like a gamble, especially in an election year. Washington just rushed emergency aid to Ukraine and Taiwan, and opening another front could stretch both resources and public patience thin. Strategic planners are watching those budget limits closely.
And clearly, some of the Israeli commentators and the security commentators are questioning how many days can Israel see the situation like this, with huge destruction in Tel Aviv, I mean, that's where most of the security elements are sited, in big urban areas like Haifa or in Tel Aviv. But there are pictures and images of whole apartment blocks being knocked down, or of houses being damaged. No one knows exactly the figures. There's a complete news blackout from Israel. Almost nothing gets through in terms of the detail of what's happened. So now this is where we are, and the long answer to your question is that, first of all, the first deception was the one of Witkoff and Trump saying that on the 13th, this was Sunday, there were going to be new negotiations, and the negotiations were making progress and they were looking good, and all of that was to prepare for this, if you like, the shock attack that was thought it could actually bring down the government in Iran. But the other one, which Ronen Bergman, the prominent Israeli commentator, senior security official, is saying, is that General Michael Kurilla throughout this period was telling the security officials that, oh yes, it was assured America would join in.
We've arrived at an uneasy crossroads. Israel can't take out Iran's nuclear program on its own, but every strike on civilian targets risks triggering deeper backlash and draining international sympathy. Iran, for its part, has shown it can take a hit and respond with precision. And history reminds us, wars aimed at forcing regime change, think Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, often drag on far longer than their planners expect. Unless cooler heads step in to chart a diplomatic off-ramp, the Middle East could be headed toward a conflict that neither side fully controls, and the rest of the world will feel the shockwaves in both geopolitics and global markets.
And also, not only would they join in and support Israel in this attack on Iran, but he was also suggesting that that America would release its mother of all bombs, the MOAB, the 11-ton bunker buster bomb that can only be carried by B-1 or B-2 American bomber, and that they would shortly be seeing all of these big bombers being sent to Diego Garcia, and that for sure the United States would be participating in the attacks on Iran. Well, that hasn't happened so far. I'm not saying it won't happen, that Trump will not join in, but I'm saying that the prospects are not clear, because what has become absolutely apparent, as I've been saying and others on your program have been saying, Israel is just not capable of destroying the nuclear sites of Iran. They cannot do it with the equipment, the bombs that they have. It's not possible to destroy it without the United States. So without destroying the nuclear program, really, Israel is just reduced to what was always called the Dahi option, which is to go and attack civilians in Tehran. And you've heard Katz, the defense minister, saying, we'll make Tehran burn. This is the Dahi option, where you just attack civilian areas, bomb hospitals, facilities, in order to put pressure on the people to turn against their leaders. Well, it's not working so far, but there's a long way to go in this war, and so we will see what the next steps turn out to be.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with someone who might find it interesting, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Hit the bell so you never miss an update, and I'll see you in the next one.